Hi everyone. On December 11th, the Holy Orthodox Church celebrates the memory of our Father among the Saints, Luke, the new Stylite. Now, the Stylites are a very rarefied and unusual category of saints in the Orthodox Church. Certainly, few people are called to live this sort of life in austerity and extreme difficulties, raised above everyone else, not having much human contact from a physical point of view, and finding life in general, well, quite challenging. But yet there are those that have been called to such a life. We might think of St. Daniel the Stylite, or perhaps of St. Simeon the Stylite. Well, Luke lived in the 900s, a time that was quite calm in terms of theological controversies, having just gone through the iconoclastic period and some of the ramifications of that. But as usual in the world, there were many things that were happening in terms of conflicts between countries and all these types of things. Well, Luke was born of very pious parents, but they were also a peasant military family. And because of that, Luke followed in the footsteps of most of his family and became a member of the army. Well, at that time, Constantinople was having some difficulties, shall we say, with the Bulgarians and entered into a war with them. Well, it didn't go very well for those in Constantinople, and thousands upon thousands of men were lost in battle. Luke, however, was spared. And because of that, it had a great impact on his life going forward. He felt that perhaps the only way that he could show his gratitude to God was by entering into the monastic life. And that, of course, is what he did. He came into the monastery and spent probably 7 years there, already engaging in many ascetical practices. For instance, he would fast 6 days a week and eat on Sunday only after Holy Communion and perhaps some prosphora. Well, he spent that time until he became ordained after about 7 years and felt the calling to return to the army, but this time in the form of a chaplain. So his chaplaincy was very successful, but at the same time he did not back off from any of his previous ascetic practices, but only added to them. Again, he would get very, very little sleep and would be an example to all the people that were in the army in terms of what true devotion to Christ was like. But after a while, he began feeling that God was calling him to something else. And in fact, he actually feels that he heard the voice of God telling him to go yet further. And so he did. He left the chaplaincy and he began yet more ascetical exercises by climbing up onto a 12-foot pillar, and this after having spent a number of years living in a tree, communing with God and fighting the devil. Well, this 12-foot pillar, even though not particularly tall, was something that gave him the ability to increase his ascetic struggles, and he did so by enduring the heat, the cold, frostbite, all sorts of things that were very difficult for anybody to endure, let alone someone standing practically naked on top of a pillar outdoors. This was after many years of enduring the bugs that were coming after him in the trees, so much that his flesh had many, many wounds on it from these insects. Yet he did endure, and he felt like this was the path that God was leading him on, to complete negation of his bodily self, so that his spirit could embrace God in its fullness and thereby give meaning to the bodily exercises that he was doing. At long last, he was called back to Chalcedon after spending a number of years on that small pillar in Mount Olympus. And at Chalcedon, he wanted to enter the final stage of his life, which was going to be 45 years sitting on top of a very, very large pillar. But because he was a priest, and because he understood the importance of the episcopacy in getting blessings for these things, he did go and ask for the blessing from the local bishop of Chalcedon, who granted it to him. So then Luke mounted the pillar and spent the last portion of his life not only in great ascetical exercises, not only in negating his more baser instincts and embracing the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ, but also because he knew that for a person to be someone who was going to be meaningful and useful to the Lord in this world, that that person had to do so by engaging the people of God in this world. And so many, many people would come to him. They would bring him food, which he would usually not accept. They would ask for his prayers, for his intercessions in all walks of life, because at this point, St. Luke had been granted the gift of foreknowledge and was able to help many, many people in their way through life. But especially noticeable was the fact of all of the healings that were happening around him. His prayers were able to cause healing for thousands of people in that area, so much so that it was said that the hospitals in the area themselves could not keep up with the number of healings that were happening through the prayers of St. Luke. Truly an amazing man who did amazing things. And lest we think that he was engaging in some sort of dualistic practice where the body is bad and the spirit is good, not at all, because the spirit itself needs to be healed. But yet, as St. Paul says, it is the body which drags us down when we give it too much care and concern. And St. Luke was not going to let this happen. He was someone that wanted to divorce himself from the needs of the body so that his spirit might be purified and thereby give the body and the spirit its true meaning. This is what he accomplished during that time 1,000 years ago. Now, we should not be discouraged when we see someone like St. Luke embarking on these sorts of things, because it's not for everybody. In fact, it's a very, very strange and yet very important calling that few people receive. But yet we can take some things to heart from his efforts, and one is in our own ascetic struggle, which as Orthodox Christians we must engage in. In that particular struggle for each of us, it must be meaningful. He gives us to understand that the needs of our bodies are far less than we would think, and so that we, in disciplining our bodies, can also grow closer to Christ by cutting off the needs of our body, the needs of our own will, and attaining union with Jesus Christ. This in our own small ways, because we are also put in a place where the Lord wants us to be in this specific time and in this specific places that we find ourselves in. The Lord also asks of us that we do these things in imitation of St. Luke, but on a much smaller scale, so that in St. Luke's case, where much was given, much was expected, well, in our cases also, much less is given to us in terms of our own spiritual and ascetic disciplines, but yet something is still expected. And as we engage in these practices joyfully and with a pure heart, may we also be able, through the grace of God, to draw nearer to him in the same way that St. Luke was many years ago. Bye-bye.